Since production must always precede predation, the free market is anterior to the state. The state has never been created by a social contract. It has always been born in conquest and exploitation. Welcome to Keith Knight, Don't Tread on Anyone. Today we have Sal the Agorist of saltheagorist.com. Check him out. He has a terrific method of communicating the message of freedom in quick, very clever memes. What we're going to do today is list each of our 5 top influences in the libertarian, voluntarist, agorist realm. Sal, thanks so much for your time, brother.
Thank you for having me, man. This is a great topic. When you told me we were going to do the top 5, I was like excited. I'm like, finally, we have usually you go on shows that don't have structure and you don't know what you're going to talk about, but I like the idea of going over like the top 5 intellectual influences. It's a great idea.
Well, thank you. Thank you. You're definitely someone I wanted to have on for the topic. So let's start with your biggest influence and what you learned from that person.
Do you want me to start at number 1 or should I start at number 5?
Let's start with number 5.
Okay, number 5. So I would say the 5th biggest, and by the way, this was not an easy list to come up with. When you asked me my top 5, this was very difficult. I even said to you, I was like, give me a few minutes here and I'll get back to you.
Yeah.
I would say that, but if I had to pick the 5th most influential person on me, I would be remiss not to say Ron Paul. Just because he's the guy who really opened the door for me, like at first. I remember watching the Republican debates. I'm ashamed to admit it, but I used to be a neocon, and embarrassing times. But I remember watching the Republican debate. I don't know if it was 2008 or 2012, but I can remember thinking to myself, all of the guys on stage that I'm supposed to choose from, they all sound crazy. And the only one who I like is the one who everybody else tells me is crazy, Ron Paul. So let me look more into this Ron Paul guy. Let me see what he's about. And that is really the first domino that fell for me. And that's how I eventually led into agorism.
Now, I think you and I probably had the same reaction. I got into Ron Paul a little in 2008, 2012, even though I supported Romney. I was a neocon as well. I really, really liked Ron Paul. I just didn't think he could win, so I was backing the horse that I thought would win. When you watched Ron Paul talk about foreign policy, was that the thing you were sort of like ashamed of? Like, what a great guy who knows nothing and just blames us for foreign policy. Did you have that same feeling?
You know what? I did a little bit, but at the same time I didn't, because I've always been into politics. I remember in the 90s when Clinton had his various scandals, and I can remember Ron Paul giving a press conference, watching on television, where he's like, who cares about this? We need to start worrying about the Iraq war. I'm thinking to myself, man, this guy's a weirdo. But in hindsight, like, I should have started paying attention. You know what I mean? That should have been the light bulb that went off, but unfortunately it wasn't. But you're right. I did think like his foreign policy is a little crazy, you know? And then of course, by the debate, when the second debate came around, I was, right in his corner.
Definitely. Yeah, Ron Paul, definitely someone I greatly admire. My 5th person would be, I'm sorry, do you have anything more on Ron Paul that you wanted to discuss?
No. Who's your 5th?
Okay, my 5th is Tom DiLorenzo. He wrote a book called what is it? I'm sorry, I'm blanking on this. It's about Abraham Lincoln.
The problem with Lincoln?
It's called
the real Lincoln. I know he's got Lincoln. 3 of them. He's got 3 of them.
Yeah, I'm talking about the real Lincoln. So
okay.
This is one where once you've defeated the state logically, if you don't have the right to initiate violence, joining this group called Congress doesn't give you that right. You kind of run into, well, but historically, you have this fancy philosophy, but get real. Without the state, we'd have slavery, child labor, and only poverty. So being able to question the Lincoln myth was so foundational to the myth of statism that it opened the door. Hey, it's okay to question other things. So I remember being like, I can't believe he doesn't like Lincoln. How can you seriously hate someone who was just virtually perfect in every way? And then he talks about the Corwin Amendment, which Lincoln supported, which would have allowed the South and the 4 northern states that had slavery to keep slavery so long as they stayed in the Union. He mentioned Lincoln's first inaugural address, where he says, basically, so long as the South pays the moral tariff, there won't be bloodshed. In other words, stay in the Union. This is about the Union. Lincoln wrote a letter to the founder of the New York Tribune, Horace Greeley, and he says, basically, slavery, if I could save the Union by freeing or keeping all the slaves, I would do it. I'm here to save the Union. So recognizing something like that, all countries except like America and Haiti were able to abolish slavery without going to war. That was so foundational. It helped me, question World War I, World War II. Tom DiLorenzo also wrote a book called How Capitalism Saved America, which just the introduction of defining the term that you're talking about, that was pretty foreign to me. It's like whatever you do, you just sort of associate, government is the people in DC, business is tall buildings, and capitalism is managers and employees. When he defined it, so hey, before I make the case for this thing, let's make sure we're on the same page. That's why I really like Tom DiLorenzo.
Two of my favorite books right there that you just mentioned, How Capitalism Saved America and Real Lincoln. Are you aware that he has another book out he just released this week, like not even 7 days ago, called The Problem with Lincoln, a third book on Lincoln, which I'm actually just reading right now. I'm on chapter 2, and I think it's the best one out of all three. Highly recommend it. Just to add on to what you were saying, isn't it interesting? And this is one of the points he makes in the book, is that everywhere else in the world, slavery ended peacefully. Even in the northern states, it ended peacefully, because the North had slavery until after the war. After Lincoln was shot and killed, they still had slaves throughout the entire process, but it ended peacefully after the war. It was only in Lincoln's quote unquote emancipation, which I don't even like to use the term emancipation because he didn't emancipate anybody. It was really in his War of the South that it was the only place in the world slavery couldn't end peacefully.
Yeah, great stuff. He's also great with primary sources. That's what I love. Until you're introduced to someone who uses primary sources, you don't see how you've been duped for so long. Abe Lincoln, the man who saved us all.
Right.
These are just sort of tales and ideas. Why don't you point to where these things happened with documents? I mean, he's citing the Stephen Douglas debates. It's like, why did I never think to look at the actual words he said rather than the tale surrounding this guy? Same with FDR, obviously.
And most of those myths, not to drag this on, but most of those myths were drawn up by Republicans during Reconstruction. During his own time, he was a very unpopular president. Like, no one liked him when he was president. He barely won the election. I don't think he had a majority of the vote. I think it was split like 3 ways or something like that. So he was very unpopular. It was only after the war that they made up all of these lies, and then they came up with this public education system to reinforce these lies. So it's the shadiest event in American history.
Absolutely. Who is your number 4th influence?
So for this one, I'm going to have to go with Walter Block. For a few reasons. Number one, Walter Block taught me a lot about economics just by watching his lectures on YouTube, reading his books, Space Capitalism, Defending the Undefendables, Water Capitalism, Privatization of Roads and Highways. All of these books really set me straight in the sense that he showed me what the consistent application of the non-aggression principle looks like. I never would have thought to apply it in some of those cases, like when you read Defending the Undefendable, and he talks about all these people who were taught to despise and hate, and he shows how they're actually providing a service. Better or worse, they're providing a service to the market. That doesn't mean that the service is naturally good or bad, but they are not aggressing upon another person. So as libertarians, we shouldn't have a problem with that. So him showing me what consistency looks like, plus teaching me so much about economics, is really why I have to throw him in number 4.
Yeah, I remember reading Defending the Undefendable, and that again, he starts off by defining libertarianism and really getting into the heart of it. Because if you think it's just about not affecting others, well, everything you do affects others. I shop at this store instead of that one. That one's negatively affected. So when you have that mindset, you could easily see, well, we have to stop trade with China because that negatively affects Americans. Isn't that, well, or rather they think it does erroneously. Even if it did though, would that justify initiating aggression against a peaceful exchange? The answer is no. Block does a terrific job in defending the undefendable. And the ideas, you realize, have been around since the 70s. Any final things you learned from Walter Block?
Oh man, I learned so much from this guy. If you think about it, he's really the last of the old school guys. He took class with Mises. You know, I think, as far as I'm aware, I could be wrong, but as far as I can think of, he's the last living student of Mises. So I mean, that in and of itself is amazing. And I've said to Walter Block, you know, how does it feel? Because when you think about it, when you go, and I said this to him, when you die, people are going to look back at you the way we look back on Rothbard and all of these great intellectuals. It's like, doesn't that mess with your brain? He goes, well, I don't think about it like that at all. So he's very humble, he's very kind, and he's the most consistent person that I've ever met.
I could see him right now. Well, Sal, tough coconut shells, because you've got to become a libertarian yourself. Write your books, listen to Tom Woods. I can already hear him. And that's why it's great to see the foundation of his ideas. So when I see an article that literally says students collect signatures to, fire Block from university, I just laugh because I understand his mindset so much that I kind of don't even need to read the article. But of course I did anyways, only to find out I was right. He doesn't believe in slavery, shockingly. He says, right. He said he doesn't believe in your average justification, considering the average justification is it's the law and we have to abide by, whatever the state says. He actually has a legitimate philosophical understanding. So yeah, Block, I mean, is an absolute.
If you think about it, if I have a kid and my child is, God forbid, my child is dying and I need to pay for some surgery, and I came up to you and I said, Keith, I need $1 million to pay for this surgery. I'll do anything. And you say, okay, well, you have to be my slave for a week, do whatever I say for a month or so. Isn't that a preferable option to having my child die? Who is the state to step into that transaction, tell me that I can't be your slave because you're going to have my child survive? So voluntary slavery is completely fine. But the way the New York Times and a lot of those students, those Marxist students, try to libel him, they're trying to make it seem like he believes in chattel slavery, where they're selling black people in chains and stuff like that. So, it just goes to show you they always attack the people who are most deadly to their narrative, most lethal to their narrative,
I definitely see that. And I would say he doesn't even, it's not that he supports any kind of slavery. People think that slavery is hard labor. No, it is not. Then I was a slave then from 16 to 18 when I was really trying to start my own landscaping business. That's not the case at all. So if you voluntarily, say, I'll do whatever you want to save my child, then we're not dealing with slavery. Again, it's back to the NAP. So my next person is a Professor Don Boudreaux. He wrote an article called Coercivists and Voluntarists. I came across this article when I was really into what is the difference between right and left? Well, right wants smaller government, except in all these other cases, and I guess right-wingers are also Franco, Mussolini, and Hirohito in Japan. So finding that consistently, that really wasn't it. It's not smaller versus bigger. They also want a bigger foreign policy. They want a bigger government with regards to social institutions or, outlawing prostitution and drugs. So when I heard coercivists versus voluntarists is the root of the genuine divide. So they'll try and divide us on race and gender, anything trivial, to get us to ignore coercivism versus voluntarism. And that was so brilliant. That was mind-blowing when I first came across it. Don Boudreaux also has another one titled Dumb Individuals, Brilliant Voters. People are so stupid, they can't be free. Also, only the people should decide the leaders. Without this democracy, then everything is terrible. Democracy is the reason the government's legitimate in the first place. So anything you apply to the immorality or the ignorance of the individual in the freedom realm applies tenfold when there's a state that they could coercively impose their ignorance, immorality on others. That is what I learned from the great Don Boudreaux.
Oh, I haven't even heard of that guy. I'll have to look that up. What is he, an author or a podcast host?
He is a professor. I feel bad. I've had him on the show. I'll send you my interview with him. And
yeah, for sure.
I think we had a really good exchange. I feel like a jerk. I don't know. George Mason University, and he works with the Learn Liberty crew. So yeah,
okay.
Don Boudreaux is terrific. Who is your third biggest influence?
So for number 3, I'm going to have to go with the great Ralph Raico. Ralph Raico was a historian, a revisionist historian, and he's really the guy who helped me come around to, he helped me come to accept the term anarchism, because prior to this, you know, I'd always thought to myself, look, you don't want to become one of these wacky anarchists, because no one's going to take you seriously if you identify as an anarchist. So you don't want to do this. And I was listening to the Tom Woods show, and he mentioned this historian, and I'm a big history nerd, named Ralph Raico. So I looked up one of Ralph Raico's books, and I read it. It was called Great Wars and Great Leaders, a Libertarian Rebuttal, a classic for anybody listening to the show who's into history. I highly recommend the book. And once I read that, I thought to myself, and then I watched some of his lectures and YouTube and stuff, and I thought to myself, well, this guy's not wacky. He's completely normal. So let me look into him. And then he started to talk about some other people that I got into. Before you know it, I was a full-on anarchist. The other thing about Raico too is that he showed me how, first of all, a couple things. Number one, how twisted the historical narrative that we're taught, quote unquote, air quotes, how twisted that narrative actually is and how backwards it actually is. It's truly not an education, it's indoctrination. And the way history is taught in public schools is really just statist apologism. The other thing he taught me was that there is something to be said for someone who's willing to criticize their own country. So if you're a German and you're willing to criticize your own country, the country of Germany, then to me that says more about you, because you're willing to go against the grain. You're willing to swim against the current, so to speak. So that's why I had to choose Ralph Raico as my number 3 most influential thinker.
Raico was terrific. He introduced me. He gave me, you know, one little thing that just sent me down the rabbit hole, and that was an article published by the New York Times. I think it was January 2nd, 1972, titled "War Entry Plans Laid to Roosevelt," and it's August of 1940. Churchill's own diaries. He says, met with Roosevelt, really wants to come in on behalf of Britain, doing everything he can to provoke an incident from Germany. So Roosevelt had bought in already in 1972. We knew this from the New York Times, that they met in Newfoundland, I think a place in Canada they met, and the strategy was to provoke an incident so the US could get into the war. 27 years later, a guy named Robert Stinnett comes out with the McCullen memo and says, here are the 8 things that we should do to get the Japanese to attack us. And 7 of those 8 points were actually implemented. So it wasn't some psycho wrote something. So what? They were actually implemented. The biggest one being Export Control Act of 1940, freezing Japanese assets. Without Ralph Raico slowly getting me into that, I never would have thought that. I would have said, World War II is, you know, an obvious reason why we need a big government to stop other big governments. Final words on Ralph Raico.
Well, I'll tell you what. One of the, in that book, Great Wars and Great Leaders, one of the things he says about Churchill is that he's a man without principles. The only principle Churchill had was a love of war, and he even talked about how he was a kid. He was obsessed with like toy soldiers and like war and stuff like that. And like you said, he is responsible for pulling the United States into not only World War II, but even World War I, when he was the Secretary of the Navy. by lobbying Woodrow Wilson to enter World War I, and then again in World War II. So Churchill probably has more blood on his hands in the 20th century, other than any of the major communist leaders like Hitler, Churchill, or Hitler, Mao, or Stalin. He's probably the fourth most deadly leader of the 20th century.
Yeah, and you can definitely look at actions the Royal Air Force took in all their colonies to stop resistance in India, in Africa, in Iraq. Oh my God, dude. When I learned that the U.S., or not the U.S., that, Western governments had been in Iraq before Bush Jr., I was so shocked. I'm like, how did I not hear about this? Son of a gun. Turns out there were sanctions. Speaking of sanctions, Churchill implemented sanctions that, according to the pro-Churchill historian Martin Gilbert, killed like 600,000 Germans. I mean, come on. Look, look, 9/11 was terrible. 3,000 innocent people. It's the same principle.
And he gets a pass for all of that.
Getting food is murdering them. I'm sorry.
Yeah, he gets a pass for all of that. And like you said, his actions in India were awful. He even went so far as to sink ships from the French resistance. Because his idea was only the English should be fighting the Germans. If you guys are too weak, so if the Germans take you over, they're going to take your ships and your supplies. So you know what? I'm sure to kill all of you now anyway. And that's what he did. And he gets a pass throughout history for this. So when I see people trying to take down Churchill statues, I'm right behind them. Yeah,
I'm definitely sympathetic to it. But when they want to replace it with a Lenin statue, I'm like,
no doubt.
All right, I'm going to let the Churchill statue stay. I'll meet you halfway, Margaret Thatcher. Please, I'm sorry.
Right. Who did you have for number 3?
For number 3, I had Hans-Hermann Hoppe.
Okay.
This is a man who wrote a theory of socialism and capitalism, in which he does a long, in-depth explanation of what these terms mean. So, capitalism, the system of making profit and making money. Well, that can't be the definition, because if you are a socialist like Bernie Sanders and you seek to occupy the state and you make a lot of money occupying the state, well, then that counts as capitalism if you're there to make money. But that can't be it. So it also can't be forced labor. Well, the gulags in Stalin's Russia, the pursuit of profit. Every time you do one thing that you think is going to reap more benefits than it will cost you in time or money or friends, you are pursuing profit. So none of those really get it. So Hans Hoppe hits the nail on the head. Communism is the abolition of private property as defined by Marx. Socialism is the institutionalized aggression against private property. Capitalism is a system of private property filled with non-aggressive contractual exchanges between private property owners. Once you understand this, that there's just capitalism and socialism and then degrees. Now, we might have better words. He is a German speaker, so maybe we could take, voluntarism and violence and have those words instead of capitalism and socialism, just to do a better job. But that was just such a great contribution. So we at least know what we're talking about when we use these terms. Another thing he did was Democracy, the God That Failed, where he explained that the problem with monarchy was not people had crowns or there was just a few of them and there were many others non-like them. It wasn't castles. The problem was monopoly on initiating violence. So when people said, there's just a few of them, we need to give this to the many, they didn't get at the root problem, which was this group, the state, has a monopoly right that no other group in society has. That was the best thing I learned from Hans Hoppe.
One thing I'd like to add in there is argumentation ethics, which is the best defense of libertarianism and private property that I can think of. I think Rothbard said it put his natural rights argument, it made it seem very weak. Just real quick, I'm sure your listeners probably are familiar, but the whole idea of argumentation ethics is that it's a proof for the homesteading principle. And if you are just to construct an argument against the homesteading principle, you have to combine natural resources of your body, your vocal cords, your mouth, your tongue, your lips, with your thought processes. So you're combining your labor with naturally occurring resources. Thus, it's a performative contradiction. to try to deny the homesteading principle, which I think is just a brilliant observation and a great way to sort of shut down the Marxist arguments in a mathematically sort of deductive fashion, and it's almost like a 2 + 2 = 4 argument rather than a saying something subjective.
Definitely. And there's another thing that I forgot to mention is he says, always value the logical stance that you have, because anytime you use empirical evidence, but be very careful, because people, when they're into politics, they do it for emotional reasons. They want to be on a winning team. They want to be part of a group. It's not the result of research. It's the result of the media issuing opinions and people accepting them so they could have friends. I'm sorry, but that's really what it is. So when you say, all right, you want real world examples, East Germany versus West Germany, North Korea versus South Korea, Botswana versus Zimbabwe, Haiti versus Dominican Republic, and Chile versus Venezuela. So now you're on the free market side. That doesn't do anything. It doesn't get at the heart of the issue, because you can always say, well, that was then, this is now. We have more information. Yes, there's never been a PS4 or a PlayStation 5 in the past, but there will be, and there will be successful socialism once we figure it out. It's inherently immoral. I'm sick of hearing, Castro's literacy rate, even though, of course, it's all based on lies and all they can read is absolute nonsense, and none of them can think clearly. That's totally irrelevant. So, yeah, that's why I just absolutely love Hoppe. Any final words on Hoppe, and then on to your second biggest influence?
Yeah, I should have. I'm kind of ashamed I didn't throw Hoppe in here somewhere. Now that you mentioned him, I completely forgot. So it just goes to show you how many brilliant thinkers there are to choose from. But I am happy with my number 2 choice, Murray Rothbard, who is probably, in my opinion, he's the greatest mind of the 20th century. Rothbard is a logician, an economist, a historian. He's everything. He literally wrote the book on everything, on ethics, on economics, on history. He wrote books on all of it. So without Rothbard, there's no way I would have ever become an anarchist. And actually, going back to my third choice, Ralph Raico, he was the guy who because he was friends with Rothbard. So once I became familiarized with Raico, then I was more apt to consider Rothbard. And I'd heard of him, and I didn't look into him too much. I didn't read any of his books because, like I said, I didn't want to assume that anarchist moniker. But once I did, I was blown back by how smart he was. And I read everything, I watched every lecture, and I just became more and more impressed. And to this day, I go back and reread his books, and I rewatch his lectures, and every time I learn something more. So I just can't say enough about Rothbard. I mean, I learned economics from him. I learned about history. I mean, so much I owe to that man. I have such a debt of gratitude. It's just a shame that I can't meet him and tell him how influential he's been to me. I mean, to go over everything that I learned from him, we would need about 3 hours. But, just from American history and Austrian economics, that alone is, I can't even put into words what it means to me. Who did you have, though, for number 2? And what do you think about Rothbard? Do you think it's a good pick? Or
quickly about Rothbard, he's so good that when you read something like, I think I've read Anatomy of the State 3 times, and I miss something every single time. It's so weird. I pick up something new, and whether it's what the state is not, or he'll just have such a clear way of explaining a complex principle. So the opening quote that I had for our show today, that was a Rothbard quote, and that gets at the heart of the issue. Well, libertarians use the state, and statists will use free market goods. So, we're kind of on the balance here. The free market and the state are sort of one and the same. No, voluntarism or production precedes predation. That is why the state is the parasite. Not, well, you benefit from the cops, taking care of you. No, me saying I'm going to kill you if you don't give me $100 so I could buy a gun so I can sometimes protect you, and if I don't, you have no recourse. That gets at the heart of the issue, which is we have one group performing actions voluntarily, and that produces wealth. People engage in these satisfactory behaviors because they believe their wealth will be increased. Whereas we then say this group has totally different rules. Murder everyone who resists your edicts. So unless you comply, no wonder there's so much poverty in the absence of voluntary exchange. You'd have people much poorer than they otherwise would be. So yeah, Rothbard was unbelievable in so many other realms. And did you think of anything more for Rothbard? Any big things that you just learned? Any red pills that Rothbard delivered?
Oh man, well, I'll tell you a couple big ones off the top of my head. Number one, the idea of compulsory cartelization and the idea of how governments and markets tend to form cartels, which aren't really possible in a free market, but they are possible when they can be enforced in a compulsory fashion by congressmen and senators. So once I learned about that, I was able to see how that structure fit into so many different bureaucratic agencies that we have today, like not just the Federal Reserve, but things like the SEC and the Department of Agriculture. All of these industries have been cartelized, and I didn't think about that. I didn't even recognize that until I learned it from Rothbard. Another thing I learned from Rothbard is the whole concept of automation. You hear like Andrew Yang talk about how we're all going to lose our jobs to machines and the robots. Well, chapter 10 of a book by Rothbard called Science, Technology, and Government proves this completely fallacious. It shows just how wrong this idea is. And he explains how all of these jobs that are lost to technological improvements are replaced with newer and higher paying jobs. So we could get, think about all of the calligraphers that can get their jobs back if we get rid of computers and typewriters. How many horse and buggy drivers can get their jobs back if we just got rid of cars? But that's not going to improve the quality of anyone's life. So it's like simple things like that that seem to be common sense, but you don't really realize them until you have somebody smarter than you sit down and explain them to you, So that's the main contribution that Rothbard made, to me at least.
Oh yeah, I absolutely agree there. My number 2 influence is a professor at the University of Boulder, Colorado, Michael Huemer. He wrote a book called The Problem of Political Authority. And it was it's so brilliant because we have so many people from Bastiat, Spooner, and all the people we've mentioned who come to the same conclusion from totally different premises that it's wild. And Huemer was the one who really just said, let's just take the common sense morality approach. If me and someone else have a charity that is legitimate, so just take any charity really, does that charity have the right to coercively collect income because they benefit other people? I mean, look, I have emails of people saying, hey, really appreciate your show. Does that mean I can say, aha, someone benefited, therefore I get to take money by force? No, of course it doesn't. Hey, I appreciate the mall being built next to my house. That increases the value of my house. They don't have the right to tax me or make laws that I have to abide by or initiate any form of aggression. You really get at the heart of what political authority is. It's not people making rules. It's not people contracting. It's some people have rights no one else has. The reason you have to obey them is because they wrote down the words and voted. Now, if they vote on different words, maybe they can repeal it prohibition style, but until then, because they wrote the words down on paper, you have to do so. And it's like, God, it's amazing that people are so skeptical of priests and religion and haha, that's irrational. But when it comes to the state, they just blindly obey. That was probably the best thing that Michael Huemer taught me. Common sense morality with regard to political authority.
I have to say, there was just a documentary that Pete Quinones and a couple other solid anarchists put out called The Monopoly on Violence, which I was fortunate enough to have a little bit of time to speak in about agorism and some other things. But Michael Huemer was in that documentary, and I have to say, I'm embarrassed to say I haven't read his book yet, but that is on my list, and you've just convinced me even more to bump it up on my list.
Yeah, it's definitely worthwhile.
Is he a professor of philosophy or political science?
He's a philosophy professor, and it's really cool because he does a lot of things. He does, vegetarianism. He does the philosophy of infinity. So he's just a smart guy who, when critically analyzing things, just said, "Oh, well, that's illegitimate." Why does this group have the right to do something but no other group does? Oh, voting, that's your example. Okay, so if Walmart lets you vote on the CEO once every 4 years, Walmart has the right to conscript you, and you have to go to Walmart schools, and they can tax your property and take your property and separate parents from their children if they don't chip in for wars based on lies. It's so ridiculous that and he approaches it from such a clear position that, yeah, Huemer is definitely a close second to number one. Who do you have for number one?
Well, before I get into my number one, what was the name of that book you put down? You said for Huemer? I'm going to read that.
It's called The Problem of Political Authority, an examination of the right to coerce and the duty to obey. And it has a nice little chess set on as the cover. Okay,
when we get done here, you have to shoot me an email with that title, because I'll remember The Problem with Political Authority. I can remember that, actually.
Okay.
Okay, so for my number one, this is going to seem kind of obvious to anybody who knows me or is familiar with me, but I chose Sam Konkin as my number one most influential thinker, because he is the founder of the Agorist philosophy, which, as far as I'm concerned, is the culmination of logical consistency. It's the application of logical consistency to the political economy. He's the first one who really ironed out the wrinkles of anarcho-capitalism, as far as I'm concerned. His theory of retributive justice, the agorist class theory, all of these different principles, not to mention the counter-economic strategy, they are all designed to be logically consistent. And that's really how I got that's really sort of how I got started, even before Ron Paul. I was reading philosophy and books on logic and truth tables and all sorts of nerdy stuff like that. And that's when I found Konkin, I immediately recognized, wow, this man is very, very consistent. And the more I dug around, the more I thought to myself, wow, I finally found it. I finally found that philosophy that I can't really identify any holes in it. I can't find any problem with it, any sort of inconsistencies whatsoever. So yeah, I have to pick Konkin. Books like New Libertarian Manifesto and Agorist Primer, also all of the journal articles he wrote. He's a very prolific article writer. All of those things were just extremely influential on my thinking, and they no doubt molded who I am and the strategy that I propose and try to advocate for today.
Yeah, that is one that I'm ashamed that I still haven't gotten to. Esoteric Entity is always telling me, hey, you got to read some of this Agorist stuff. That's got to be next on my reading list. It's just so intimidating looking at the book sometimes. I'm just like, I'll go watch videos instead. So give me an example of when an Agorist philosophy would differ from an anarcho-capitalist philosophy, if it differs at all.
Yeah, no doubt. Mainly it differs in terms of strategy. So, ANCAPs will claim to abide by the non-aggression principle, but they'll tell you to go out and vote. They'll tell you to go vote for a master to rule over your neighbors, which is a violation of the non-aggression principle. Or they'll tell you to, we're going to have a boogaloo, right? We're going to walk into Capitol Hill and have a mass shooting, right? That's not consistent with the non-aggression principle. This isn't moral. That's not the behavior of a moral individual. So the only philosophy, and there's others too that we can dismiss, like anarcho-Zionism, the creation of a libertarian state, which is almost like saying a married bachelor. It's illogical. It's a contradiction in terms. So the only strategy that we're left with is counter-economics. So that is just the use of the black and gray markets to subvert or undermine the state apparatus. So rather than try to get a bill passed to audit the Federal Reserve, which is never going to happen, and even if it did, it wouldn't make a difference. Rather than do that, use Bitcoin. Rather than donate your money to the NRA and vote for small government Republicans, which is, historically, that's only done more to take away your gun rights. Get yourself a 3D printer and download some files. There's all sorts of examples. If you don't want to pay inflation, use gold and silver to save your money. So we stress direct action over political action. And that, to me, is what consistent anarchism is.
Definitely. And you could see that it definitely would scare the mind of the authoritarian a little more. Because once you're already playing on their terms, let's say you believe that Rand Paul is a net benefit. I can agree with you. He is on average, possibly a net benefit. However, you are still buying into this is how we enact change, by recognizing the state is legitimate and using it as a mechanism to further society. When you just totally disassociate yourself and recognize them as having no legitimacy, then it's scary. Then it's like the psycho ex-boyfriend who, instead of, making you reliant on him, says you can't have friends unless I approve of them. Once you stop just saying, oh, yeah, I don't recognize your right to rule anymore. I don't even use the things that you say to use. I mean, let alone, wearing a mask or staying inside or, only using the state's currency. It really is striking at the root of what makes them different. So agorism, anarcho-capitalism, it's not so much a principle difference as it is a philosophical approach to change. Is that correct?
Yeah, no doubt. It's much more of a strategic difference than anything else. Agorism is just a strategy to achieve anarcho-capitalism. And it's funny because I like to say the anarcho-capitalists don't have a strategy to achieve anarcho-capitalism, but the agorists do. So that's why I'm an agorist.
I totally agree. My number one person is Larken Rose. He wrote a book called The Most Dangerous Superstition, and he explained government, or the problem with authority, as the right to rule. And by ruling, we don't mean people making rules about how you treat them. Treat me X, Y, and Z way, or I'm not going to associate with you, or you're not allowed in my house. That is not ruling. That is people having a criteria on which they will engage with you for whatever reason. Ruling is when you initiate aggression against another person. You're saying, I have a better claim to your body than you do. I have a better claim to your time than you do. Well, if we're consistent, why don't you get to do that to me? Why do I get to do that to you? Only a philosophy that says no person or group of people have the right to rule. Now, what liberates your brain sort of is, I originally was thinking, oh God, it's going to be rough to convince everyone that the state shouldn't be involved in education and healthcare and the environment and the FDA and the EPA and agriculture and the minimum wage. What you do is you strike at the foundation of the issue. The issue is some people claim the right to rule others and they have no such right. And Huemer gets more into the intellectual side, but Larken Rose in The Most Dangerous Superstition just nails it again and again and again. My original thing on YouTube was I was just going to read one chapter at a time. And like my first 80 videos are just Larken Rose's book, one chapter at a time. And then I got into it. So actually his book is what got me into YouTube altogether. So Larken Rose came to Phoenix and was doing and he had a meeting where he talked about how to convince people about anarchism. And he uses the Socratic method so well that that instead of saying, here's the philosophy, what do you think about it? It's much more of a, you tell me what you think, and then I'll just ask questions. Oh, you think you believe in gun control. Does anyone have the right to initiate gun control? For example, I did some research and government has done some terrible things. Do me and my friends have the right to violently disarm the government and shoot them if they don't give us their guns? You can have a gun, but you have to get a license from me, Sal, and Pete Quinones. Come on, clearly we are trying to create a power differential and we're claiming the right to rule other people. Well, doesn't that apply to the state? Is there anything the company Apple can't do that government can do? Again, what if you got to vote for the CEO of Apple? And you know what, if you don't like the fact that people murder and rape in this society, well, then you can move. No, the obligation's not on you to move. It's for them to stop initiating aggression against peaceful people. The biggest thing, the biggest red pill that got me into Larken Rose was he was debating Tom Willicott, a minarchist. And Tom Willicott goes, you know, Larken, this thing is good in theory, but I just don't trust people. And Larken goes, what species do you want running the government? And I was just like, oh my God, why did I not think of that? How did I say that term I don't know, 200 times when talking to anarchists without ever realizing the words actually coming out of my mouth. That is what I learned from Larken Rose.
Yeah, I've seen him speak before, and his penchant for logical consistency is right up there with Konkin, and he reminds me a bit of your previous pick, Michael Huemer, in just how like they're both very brilliant. Larkin had a series of, I don't know if this is the one you were talking about, but he had a series of lectures called Candles in the Dark, which I didn't attend, but I did hear, I know a few people who did, and they said, wow, you have to attend his lecture series. It's very, very brilliant. And I haven't done that yet, but if he ever comes around this area, no doubt I will.
Yeah, Larkin was a really big one. So I just wanted to ask you, with all the knowledge that we have gained, sort of that we are standing on the shoulders of giants, and it's too bad we don't have H.L. Mencken or Rothbard or Mises to talk about masks today, considering the thing in the news right now, before they move us on to something else, is, should the masks be mandated? I'm curious if you have any general libertarian ideas to the current pandemic or the mask issue in general.
So I think just in general, no one has the right to force you or I to do anything. That's number one. So whether that comes down to wearing a mask or closing your business or staying home from work, whatever the case is, no one has the right to tell you what to do. Now, if it's done in a voluntary fashion, if you do the research on your own and you come to the decision that, hey, I need to take such and such steps to protect myself in the midst of a quote unquote pandemic, then that's fine. You can and should do those things. But no one has the right to impose their will on another person. No one has the right to violate somebody else's bodily autonomy. No one has the right to make health decisions for you. I think if I'm afraid of a potential virus or a pandemic, then I have to look to solutions that I have to look for things that I can do for myself and not impose those ideas on other people. So stay home if you're afraid of the virus. Don't tell me what I have to wear or what I can't wear. Now, if it's done in a voluntary fashion, if you're a business owner, then that's fine. But that's not what's going on anymore. Now we have states mandating mandatory muzzling is frankly what it is. And moreover, in my opinion, I think that this is very dangerous, the whole mandatory masking thing, because what it does is it conceals your individual features. And all of a sudden, everybody becomes a mask and not a person. And there's the state is sort of dehumanizing the individual. This is a very dangerous step. And historically, this is an indicator of very, very bad things to come. So hopefully it doesn't get there, but we are certainly headed down that road. Also, I think it establishes a terrible precedent. People, the idea that the government can just tell you to close down your businesses arbitrarily, this has never been an acceptable idea before in American history. We've never allowed such a thing to occur. So this is completely immoral. It's a violation of the non-aggression principle. It's obviously unconstitutional and just further evidence that paper doesn't stop tyrants. Yeah, I'm completely opposed to mandatory masking, and I think that it's a very dangerous precedent. And just a quick final word on this. Who in their right mind would think that politicians should be making health decisions for us? I mean, these people can't even write a budget. Why would we want them to be in charge of a pandemic? Let's say there is a global pandemic. Why would you want these people to be in charge of it? It doesn't make any sense. These are the last people you would want in charge. And if you think about it, I'm right outside New York City in New Jersey, between Phil Murphy in New Jersey and Andrew Cuomo in New York. These two have committed genocide. They have cleaned out the nursing homes of the old people in these two states based on their negligent and ignorant policies. And of course, don't worry, they've just both concluded investigations of themselves, and they've both determined that they have committed no wrongdoing whatsoever. So I don't expect to see genocide charges anytime soon, but.
Yeah, that was definitely a shocker. Mandating COVID-19 patients into nursing homes to make room for hospitals that weren't overrun.
Yeah.
That was a great point about, well, why do you trust them? Like, does Trump have a medical degree that I don't know about?
Right.
Why are you looking to this guy who, look, he's great at getting attention. He's great at entering a field he doesn't know anything about and beating competitors. He gets people excited about flag burning and all this other nonsense. But why do you look to him? So when I hear people are like, oh, Trump has done such a terrible job at this, and I go, what would you expect?
Right.
But that's the weird thing about statism. Everyone becomes not only an expert, but a violent expert. So all my family members since like March have become people who know something, who are so positive that you should wear gloves, that you should be forced to. That was in March. Now, they haven't mentioned gloves in a month. Now it's masks. I guess that it's because of all the research they're doing. They're coming across competing ideas. It's not only makes you immoral, it makes you stupid too. That you think you can coercively impose all this stuff. How do you know it's not better if I get the virus, my antibodies or whatever, however it works, and then kicks them off? That's the flu theory, that if you inject someone with the flu, they become immune to it. So you intentionally give it to them. Maybe I should get this intentionally. But for some reason, people are like just so positive. The thing you mentioned earlier, the World Health Organization and Fauci and the general surgeon, health surgeon, whoever, they all said masks don't work. And the World Health Organization on January 14th on their Twitter feed said it cannot go from one human to another, this new disease. So look, even if you say they're the most virtuous people on the planet, they are still prone to error. Well, I'm just going to pretend that they do this on accident. But the most favorable thing is they make a lot of accidents too. So don't let them coercively impose things on others. They might be wrong.
No doubt. And even if it turned out to be the case that masks were, let's imagine that we were in the midst of the worst pandemic in human history and masks were the solution to solve this problem. Even under those circumstances, no one has the right to impose their will onto your body. Okay, that's your body is your property, and that's it. No one else ever has the right to violate that. I mean, could you imagine how ridiculous it would have sounded in 2015 if someone told you, "Hey, in 5 years, you're going to have a pandemic, and a guy from The Apprentice is going to be managing it"? You would have laughed. You would have thought that sounds crazy,
Yeah.
But the idea that we have to take medical advice from these, morons, frankly, just morons, is just insane to me. Even your own doctor, when you go to the doctor and you're sick and he says, "Hey, you have X, Y, and Z, here's what you have to do to fix it," that's a recommendation. He's not putting a gun to your head. So why do I have to listen to Phil Murphy, the former head of Goldman Sachs, make health decisions for me? This is crazy. I don't trust that guy. As he's robbed me in the past. Why would I trust him to make decisions in my best interest? It's insane.
It's wild. And just like the Pearl Harbor 9/11 effect, government's there to keep you safe. Pearl Harbor happens, that's them not keeping us safe. So does government go to jail like the social contract dictates? Nope. The approval rating skyrockets and people elect FDR again.
Right.
After 9/11, Bush had an approval rating of 91% when he didn't do the most simple thing ever, stop terrorists or other people from aggressing. And now Cuomo is the most popular person. I wouldn't be surprised if they say, health issues, sorry, Biden's out, Cuomo's in, yada, yada, maybe with Kamala Harris. But how is Cuomo, of all people, you'd think it'd be the woman in Montana or something who has, so few cases, or maybe DeSantis, who has a similar population density to New York, but has better results. But Cuomo, the worst people rise to the top and then get rewarded when they do terrible things.
You took the words right out of my mouth. Politics is the one profession where the crud rises to the top, so to speak. But
and then gets rewarded.
Yeah.
If the worst get on top of Sears and Blockbuster and MySpace, we know what ends up happening. When it's government, it's like, who was it? Hank Paulson, the former head of Goldman Sachs, was Secretary of Treasury during the 2008 crisis. That is regulatory capture. It's these same people. doing to us through the state what they couldn't get away with in the marketplace of ideas and voluntarism.
And you know what it reminds me of? Whenever they fail, they try to prop it up to make it look like they've done such a great job. So like, for example, like you see in England where they have to lionize and sort of deify the National Health Service because it's such a disaster. It's such a disaster that they have to have the Queen on billboards saying, God bless our NHS workers. That's the type of propaganda they have to protect the worst of the worst institutions. Isn't it funny how they always will go out there and defend the NHSs of the world or the Andrew Cuomos of the world? It's just, again, like you said, the crud rises to the top in politics, and that is, the source of the problem.
And we never just look at the foundation of what they say makes them legitimate and apply it consistently. So when they say, well, there's a social contract, the reason you have to obey them and pay them taxes is because they keep you safe. The reason you have to fund education is because in exchange, you get an education. Okay, let's say hypothetically in a land far away, there's a bunch of people and they've been educated, but they're really completely ignorant. Then do we get to stop paying property tax? No, of course not. We got to keep raising them up because teachers are underpaid. Red for Ed in Arizona, they were marching by the hundreds of thousands in Phoenix, Red for Ed. Or if I have a right to healthcare through some national health service and I don't get taken care of, well, then does government go to jail? Do the doctors go to jail? What happens? Of course not. It's a completely contradictory system that it's so vital that they control education so people can't think their way out of it.
And like the general public on this particular topic is so sheepish that it drives me crazy, because if you say to somebody, well, do you think that we should let the government be in charge of the provision of cell phones? They would say, no, of course not. That's crazy. Don't you know about Stalin and the gulags? And why would you want communism? We say, okay, so then why not apply that logic to policing or courts? Any of the inefficiencies that we see on YouTube or the news about police are the same sort of inefficiencies that one should expect from any socialized monopoly. So the fact that you have Republicans who are they think that they're vehemently anti-socialist, so vehemently defending these socialist organizations, it's like, it reminds me of like something out of Orwell or Animal Farm or something like that.
It definitely does. The Republicans. Oh gosh, what were you just saying about them? Yeah, they're definitely horrible. And about the police. So if you look at what they currently say, well, we have a right to education and we have a right to healthcare and we have a right to housing and a right to $1,000 a month. Before we expand this thing called the state, how do you like the free safety that the government gives you with police? How do you like the guaranteed safety? Do you see that calling something guaranteed doesn't increase the access that someone has to it? Those idiots in Bangladesh just need a law guaranteeing wealth, and then they'll be wealthier than America. And just use the minimum wage, obviously, and regulate.
Right, yeah, of course.
And then you got to regulate and redistribute wealth, and then you'll really have the secret. That is just incredible. Any thoughts? The other thing going on is Black Lives Matter, and Jill Jorgensen very happily supporting Black Lives Matter, which of course I'm very big on, people embracing their heritage, even their race or their family, regardless of it. I think that's fine. I believe the organization Black Lives Matter is a Marxist front, pretty much. If you look on their website, my reasoning is because on their website, 3 things are about, blacks and achieving justice, and the rest are socialist talking points. Do you have any thoughts on Black Lives Matter?
No doubt the founder is an avowed Marxist. I forget her name. It's on the top. This is the tip of my tongue. I can't remember it, but no doubt she's an avowed Marxist. I will say though that I don't think I don't think it's fair to say every single individual who utters the phrase Black Lives Matter is a Marxist. I remember in 2016 when the cops here in Staten Island strangled Eric Gardner because he didn't pay a 15-cent cigarette tax to Comrade de Blasio. They strangled him on a sidewalk in public view and put the individual who filmed it in prison and gave the cop a raise. When that happened, thousands of us met in Washington Square Park, and we marched all the way down to Madison Square Garden. We basically shut down Manhattan, and then we eventually went on to Brooklyn. And there were, some Marxists there. I was there, so there were agorists there. I was with friends. Other ANCAPs were there. There were regular Republicans and Democrats there. So I think just because someone utters the phrase Black Lives Matter, they haven't given you enough information to draw any conclusions about their economic beliefs. But like you said, I agree that the organization, the founder, are avowed Marxists. And I don't think anybody should be donating money to that particular organization because it might go to promote Marxist efforts. Now, insofar as Joe Jorgensen saying Black Lives Matter, I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with that at all. I think that, Black lives do matter. I think white lives matter. Chinese lives matter. So I don't care where you're from or what your, nationality or ethnicity is. If you're a commie, you're my enemy. And if you're not, then we're friends. That's as far as anything else, individuals will vary so far as what their particular tastes and preferences are. And I have a wide tolerance for that, so.
That is an excellent analysis. I, of course, was just talking about, as I am with most things, really just the intellectuals leading the movement. For example, I know a lot of Democrats and a lot of Republicans and a lot of progressives and a lot of conservatives. They are great people who have unfortunately been tricked into the belief in political authority. Just like
Exactly.
There are people who, what was day one of Black Lives Matter? Like, was it Trayvon Martin or, Philando Castillo? I'm sure there are people with the best of intentions. That's why I hate that, we can't have, genuine conversations and discussions about how do we progress it, because it's all on the foundation of, and we need economic justice. Hold on. That
Right.
sounds like something else. Why have we made this switch? Why can't it be, as Scott Horton says, accountability for killer cops? I'd be on board for that. But you do have to realize, who is in charge of something here. So, lot to go through. Pandemic, riots, BLM. We got a lot of problems to solve. I definitely think having a libertarian alternative. We've been against the drug war and for helping things that I guess would disproportionately help the Black community, a lack of regulation. You'd think we'd have a bit of a bigger narrative. So I actually don't have any problem with Jorgensen joining them at all. It's just unfortunate that the movement's been so hoodwinked and takes away. That they should literally just be saying, if I was doing what Derek Chauvin was doing, someone either would have thrown a rock at my head or charged me or shot me. We just need equality. If I don't have the right to do it, a person with a badge doesn't have the right to do it. This is, I see it as such a big moment for, people disgruntled, for them to embrace our ideas, but they're not really getting across. Any ideas on how to communicate to BLM?
You know what? One point real quick I want to make is, we saw after the George Floyd incident when he was murdered, there was like protests, and a lot of these protests that were happening were peaceful to begin with. And then it wasn't until we saw the AutoZone, where the one guy with the black umbrella and the black ski mask, was a white guy, who had a claw hammer, and he was going around smacking out the windows of the AutoZone. That's when the protests turned into riots. And isn't it funny that individual, the peaceful protesters, chased him back to the police station, and he ran inside the police station. So we saw the state trying to change these protests into riots. And I think that the state has a interest in selling a divisive racial narrative, because if we're fighting amongst ourselves, we can't be focusing on the true enemy, the politicians. So that's why they need it to be white versus black, right versus left, Black Lives Matter versus all lives matter, liberal versus conservative, pro-police versus anti-police. No. It's us versus them. And every time they sell us a false narrative, they prevent us from reaching true accountability.
Exactly. Coercivist versus voluntarist. So even if you're, in the private sector can violate your rights too, but we just don't have different standards for them. So that's what limits them so much. As far as agent provocateurs, this of course was the Denver Post reported on this for the G20 summit. We have things like COINTELPRO, the FBI operation. We have things in the 50s. We have things like PATCON, Patriot Conspiracy, where the FBI was infiltrating militia groups in the 90s, such as Elohim City. The FBI under COINTELPRO killed Frank, oh God, I can't think of his name, Fred Hampton. You have the FBI sending MLK a suicide letter. We know you're a fraud. We're going to expose your affair, your extramarital affairs. You need to kill yourself. This is something that definitely it exists. CIA, FBI, these are verifiable things. So when you see that AutoZone video, it's not totally irrational to go, that's probably one of the thousands that that they admittedly have.
And then they turn around and have the nerve to say to us, well, without tax, taxation is the price we pay for civilized society. It's like, this is the opposite of civilized society, so it just goes to show you how much they have taken the narrative and completely flipped it.
I know. That reminds me, I need to call the police and tell them that I need a refund for not making things civil. There is a lack of civility. Right. I'm looking at it right now. Yep, Minneapolis. Oh, and Scottsdale. Logan Paul got arrested like 2 blocks away from me for, what they were doing to a P.F. Chang's. It's like it was all over. So, yeah, again, we got to be able to hold these things consistently. Sal, thank you for going over with me. Your website is saltheagorist.com. Now, I was scrolling through some of your podcasts. You have quite a few. Do you have one that you recommend that you would like to introduce people to get the general ideas before they, start scrolling indiscriminately trying to look for one?
Yeah, if you go to my SoundCloud, I always have pinned to the top of my SoundCloud is always the most recent episode plus another one called WTF is Agorism. That is sort of, I made that episode because I would get so many, just bombarded every day with questions about agorism. So I put all of them together, made a list of all the topics, of all the questions that I get about agorism. I also fielded a bunch of questions from social media about agorism, and I answered them all in that episode. So if you're interested in learning about agorist philosophy or counter economics, check out that episode. It's called WTF is Agorism, and that's on my SoundCloud at Sal Mayweather.
Terrific. Sal, really appreciate your time. Thank you to everyone who watched. I will finish with a quote from The Most Dangerous Superstition. If human beings are so careless, stupid, and malicious that they cannot be trusted to do the right thing on their own, how would the situation be improved? By taking a subset of those very same careless, stupid, and malicious human beings and giving them societal permission to forcibly control all the others. Thank you for watching Keith Knight. Don't tread on anyone. Sal, appreciate your time, brother.
Thank you, Keith.